going to talk not about specific companies on this panel, or you can, but I won't force your hand on that, but really trends in investing in computer vision. And so I want to start broadly. Where do you see the biggest opportunities right now?
So just by way of background, Glasswing's full strategy is AI-enabled investments. Basically, we will not look at a company that doesn't have some level of AI, and narrow AI clearly, and for our investment horizon. And that could be vision, it could be speech, natural language, whatnot, but it has to be tied to machine learning. So from some of the earlier comments in the day, while one can divorce learning from the other facets, we actually look for both. And when you speak, funny enough, last week I was at a conference about speech and natural language processing, and here's another sort of deep event on vision. As we think about opportunities, we find them literally disrupting every facet of the end markets that we can think of, from enterprise, encompassing MarTech, sales tech, predictives, data, intelligent visual data, to healthcare, to platforms, which in my world, are robotics broadly and consumer robotics, to cybersecurity.
So Rudina, that's everything you're saying.
Pretty much.
Lots of opportunity.
Well, what I'm saying is, from a wave perspective, it's, again, I look at it as buckets. It's enterprise, platforms, and cyber and infrastructure. Then when you get to the opportunities themselves, we can talk a bit about what's reality and what's noise, and how do you differentiate from the talent pool to what's actually being solved. The promises are big. Sometimes the reality of where the tech is not.
Yeah, that's for sure, and we will get into that. But Rohit, I want to pass to you. Where do you see the biggest opportunities right now?
So just a background here as well. I'm from GM Ventures, so General Motors. So we invest in all technologies that enable cars and getting from A to B. So leaving that aside for a minute, we've talked so much about cars and autonomous cars today. I'm sure we'll do more, but just as a general opportunity area, I would say, of course, there are lots of technologies that are coming together. So here we've talked about, in the context of vision, there's sensor technology, there's artificial intelligence, or just intelligence in general, machine learning. There's and then there's compute platforms. I like opportunities where in two different ways. One is where I think an amalgamation of technology comes together. So I think from a business perspective, when you look at these different technologies actually coming together and solving a problem, those opportunities are the most exciting to me. So I feel like you at least need to have two legs of that stool to really make an opportunity even more interesting. And then another way to look at it, which is when I retrospectively sort of look at the kind of investments I've made, I get gravitated to investments and opportunities where, again, there's generally a hardware component, which is very generally a disruptive sort of technical component. There's a software component which leverages the hardware to do even better, and then hopefully what gets me even more excited from an opportunity perspective is that if there's a data play which leverages this hardware, which is uniquely deployed to do what that market wants to do. And so again, I think from an opportunity perspective, just as from trends perspective, just looking at the space from those two different lenses, I think you can identify opportunities which are much more exciting.
So let's talk about visual technology specifically. What's hype and what's real out there, Rudina? Oh, you're gonna?
Well, I don't know actually how to recognize always hype versus not, but
you're a VC. You're supposed to definitely front like you can always recognize.
Yeah, it's tough. It's all VCs don't like to admit that, but I think it's pretty tough because you never know that you're in a hype cycle until you get out of it with a crash. But for example, we've talked about LiDAR here. Looked at probably 15 plus 20 so going LiDAR companies, startups. Many radar companies, many artificial intelligence companies focused on different aspects of sort of the human interaction or the environment interaction. So I think the autonomous vehicle debate in general and sort of the discussions, there's a lot going on there, and I think a lot of that is real, but everyone's not. There are going to be very few winners. I mean, in this space, and I think so. I think that I don't want to categorize that as a hype or not, but there's just too much activity.
There's a lot of activity in this
both
space
in machine
right now.
learning, and same goes for machine learning as well.
So you've looked at 15 LiDAR companies and a large number of radar companies. Are you seeing stuff out there that's exciting right now?
Oh yeah, definitely. And that's sort of that's the exciting part of all of this, right? Is where you do see nuggets of of progress and sort of these companies that are really doing something very different, and they're out there for sure. They're out there for sure.
Rudina, what are you seeing?
So I would say we have a bit of a hype, and there's good reason for the excitement. There's also the hype element, and you kind of know that when 90+% of the startups that approach you, their domain is .ai, whether they're .ai or not. So I do think that everybody in the market recognizes the wave, but where we're seeing some interesting sort of opportunities, because again, from an investment perspective, I'm looking at the 5 to 10 year horizon, from a startup to a true sort of build out company to a market leader, ideally. How do you drive adoption? MarTech is an area where vision is really about to make quite a bit of interesting change and transformation, in that not only have brands gone omni-channel, i.e. social, mobile, web, whatever other form of delivery, brick and mortar, but and we've tried to understand intent, we being generally brands, but they've tried to understand intent. Now with vision you have ability both for more interaction back and forth, but also to leverage some of the vision capabilities and data, both in terms of what advertising, video, and other facets you deliver, as well as on the reaction side. So then that's a real sort of just narrow category. Take that to other end markets, but there's a lot of dollars going from how do women apply makeup and what can you do there, to literally billions in that, to medicine, to patient management, and so it's completely changing that facet. But just marketing alone is huge.
And so that's an opportunity that's real near term, right? I mean, that's roll out right away.
Yeah, and interestingly, we're seeing it manifest itself in two ways. We're seeing startups that are kind of have a little bit of revenue trying to retrofit themselves with getting vision as part of their value prop, and then we're seeing new ones which are starting with largely out of universities. That's also the other facet that's sort of I find quite fascinating, different than other waves of disruption where you've had two 20-year-olds in their sort of dorm room coming up with an idea. Here, you need to know what the hell you're talking about and what you're doing. I mean, the three guys, I don't think they were 21, any of them, right before us. So you have a different...
I think they would love that you don't think any of them are 21. But they're very young.
You for sure were on the 19 side, but no, but there's a different DNA of the founder. There's a different DNA of the solution. So it's not as easy. It's actually a real technical problem that you're solving. Manifest that in marketing or other categories. We have a very different type of startup in this wave.
Right. Well, what is the technology that we need to see move forward that perhaps isn't best supported by the VC community,
Sure.
but in order to create the businesses that you guys want to fund, it needs a boost?
Okay, I can sort of take that, at least a perspective on that. A lot of the discussion that we've had this morning has been focused on, for example, in the autonomous vehicle space, what happens, how do we perceive the environment? How does the robot or the car perceive the environment? I would sort of, I think the one area that's getting less attention, you flip it around. I think you also sort of need to think about and bring it back to the human, which is what's happening within the vehicle, for example, or how is the person behaving? Are they the person that should be in the vehicle? What are they doing or not? Or how are they feeling? A lot of that. Relates back to technology-wise. Again, from a vision perspective, there's authentication, there's biometrics, there's recognition of emotions. There's this potentially even be able to tell, a variety of different factors. I mean, I can at least give another 10 examples. But so bringing it back, I think, to look at technologies from a vision perspective that brings it back to the human and how the human interacts with the machine is one area which I think can use some attention, at least in my space.
Got it.
I would say two parts to that question, or two different answers to that question. One, cross-disciplinary data and information, and also sort of sharing. So if I'm looking to invest in a next-gen consumer robotics platform, you need vision, and you need pretty good vision, technologies, but you also, and sensors and everything else, but it's a system. You also need speech. You also need learning. And I sort of divorced myself from my past approaches and views of proprietary type networks. I think all open source, I'm game, and I will back any company that does that, because let's get those algorithms trained and let's leverage each other's work, and then go fight the war on the real front, which is the data. And I think Google and even the Ubers of the world and Amazons of the world have paved the way for not always good reasons, but or not always beneficial reasons to the bigger market. But I think a little bit of cross-sharing between vision technologies and other technologies would be one area, and then secondly, going open source and not trying to own the whole stack. I don't think it does anybody service, even though we would love it from a VC point of view.
Yeah, for sure. Rohit, I want to go back to this idea that a lot of the conversation we've had this morning is about the technology and how to get the technology to work, and secondarily the systems and how the systems will change. But we have done less talking about the human. The human as the driver, the human as the passenger, and the human as the ambient surroundings. What opportunities for entrepreneurs lie in thinking about that human in the system?
Okay, so you want me to give you more examples, but yes,
me?
sure. I think I talked about biometrics, for example. That is huge. You can do a lot with vision there, all the way from authentication to is there a baby left behind in the vehicle, for example. The other examples would be around. We talked a little bit about how humans sort of interact with the vehicle from the outside and the inside, just to be able to understand, for example, in the vehicle, is the human getting sick? I mean, we talked about getting seasick, but that's a real problem. A high percentage of people have a tendency to get sick in the vehicle, which is when they're looking at the horizon and driving. So now when you're just a passenger, that gets exacerbated quite a bit when you're in an autonomous vehicle, for example. The other perspectives around what does a human want to do in a vehicle? What is the best way, and how do you best design the experience so that they get to do what they want to do in a vehicle? This could relate back to vision technologies around AR. This could relate back to vision technologies around VR. This could relate back to how, using vision, we can understand the emotion that a passenger may be experiencing based on what's happening inside or outside the vehicle. So those are the kind of examples that sort of come to mind.
So, Rudina, I loved how you mentioned that every startup is a .ai, regardless of whether they have AI inside. So what else are you seeing? For example, in my inbox for a year, I got, "We are the Uber of X." Just fill in the blank, right? That trend, thankfully, was very 2016, less of it in 2017.
So, okay, so it's interesting, when you're at the beginning of a wave, you see a lot of companies that try to go for the platform play. So they will own the ecosystem, and the whole world will be an app or in a robotics environment, a skill to their ecosystem. Then as you gain traction, then you become the Uber of something, which is, you're trying to go more specialized in vertical market, and the value prop is narrower but better. And you see that movie play over and over from cycle to cycle. To your point, I think we're at the phase where we're seeing the platform plays. I mean, again, the guys before us and in other verticals, it's time to disrupt Salesforce, right? There's a reason why a lot of the incumbents are being very, very aggressive around AI. They have disrupted somebody else before, So we're at the beginning, and we're seeing a lot of platform plays. To your question, I think so consumer robotics is something that we're seeing it played out by the big guys. And consumer robotics, I'm leaving autonomous cars because sort of they've been covered, but we're seeing what Alexa in Echo, Echo is the CAN, but it's really the Alexa war and Google Home. In the interest of full disclosure, I've made my own bet with Jibo.
With what?
Jibo, J-I-B-O, out of the MIT Media Lab, Cynthia Brazil, and Steve Chambers, which is basically a full consumer robotics system. And as I was referring to it, I was thinking of it earlier, as you think about vision and learning. But as it relates to your question around humans as well, Jibo is a social robot, sits on our kitchen counter, understands all facets of you, and has not only a screen, which I would expect Amazon has already announced, and Google Home will probably announce one shortly, but it's multimodal, it's touch, so all the sensors that go in with it, but it's being trained to behave with to interact with a normal human. What I think we aren't focusing on in that category is that in turn, I think consumer robotics and robots will retrain our behavior. At first, they will try to mirror us so we can accept them, and I can't believe I'm referring to them as almost like humans, but it's going to happen. We've seen it with other facets of technology, and then we will get retrained. So that's an area ripe for disruption. Cybersecurity is another one.
So just to pause on that to make sure I'm understanding so you're saying that in the Boston example, first the car would try to figure out how to drive like a Bostonian, and then the car would train the Bostonian to drive a little safer.
Yeah, I was speaking for my chair inappropriately with the guys who were discussing, but I don't know why we're assuming that. I know why you'd want to be overly cautious, follow the law, not, especially as you're getting everybody to adopt and get comfortable with this new thing of self-driving cars. But at some point, there is learning. It may be controlled learning, but there is learning. Why would we assume that the more efficient automation would want, by choice, to remain inefficient in perpetuity or asymptotically? I don't think that would be the case.
Yeah,
I think,
for sure.
And they started hinting at the end about, maybe they will take pictures and go send them to the police and whatnot. We're going to reshape. Technology will reshape our behavior just as much as we're shaping technology.
It's a plug for the design researchers in the house.
Indeed.
So you mentioned Google Home and Amazon Echo, and I've just received one of the new Amazon devices that actually has the camera in it to take pictures of the full outfits in one's bedroom. How important is visual technology going to be to those assistants going forward?
In my view, mission critical, because if you're thinking of them as assistants, I think over time, while we may not be quite at the humanoid phase, over time, they will be part of the household and the family fabric. And it's like saying how important is vision to individuals to interact. It's that critical, and when you don't have it, we know what the consequences are and how difficult that is. So to establish relationships, to understand intent, to establish a rapport, I don't think you can really see the consumer, intelligent consumer electronics market truly take off as one would hope without vision.
Rohit, what do you think?
Yeah, I think vision is going to be extremely important. I think the idea of this Internet of Eyes that Evans talked about is really relevant, because when you sort of look into the future, there are going to be cameras, optical systems that are observing the world around you, like all the time, possibly, and contextually, what I get really excited about is when you think about the internet when it first got started in the 90s, that has evolved into so many use cases that we had definitely not thought of back in the 90s, mid-90s. I feel like with vision, we're moving away from sort of the digital world into the physical world much more quickly, and I think the vision really enables you to do that. And so now you get a network effect, which is this, let's call it Internet of Eyes because we're here with Evan. And you get this network effect, which now will allow you to sort of build these use cases, these applications that are contextual, that are made for you, that none of us actually can think of or have any idea what that might look like.
Have thought of yet.
Yeah, right now, yeah, for sure. I can certainly bet on that 10 years from now, there are going to be use cases and apps that nobody's talked about today. I mean, given that we're going to have the vision systems everywhere.
But generally, where do you both see the conversational home assistants going?
Well, I've put my dollars where my mouth is, so
Sure.
I basically, I think right now, I mean, they've been defined until the camera capability came out. We had a newly defined category, which was intelligent speakers, because there's some learning, there is search capability that's really, speech in a can, and I don't mean to belittle it, but it's going to be very rudimentary vis-a-vis where we're going and where we are going in at a fast pace. I think we will see probably at a high level 2 categories of assistance: purely utilitarian, so connecting the home, connecting the devices, sort of managing the environment, perhaps some security, some safety capabilities, and you'll see that some players will do it from the floor, think iRobot and the data angle. Some players will do it through e-commerce, and others sort of getting devices in the home. Nest is trying to come at it from a narrow app or narrow use to going platform. So you'll see that category, and I think there'll be the next gen consumer electronics. It's just they'll have intelligence. Aside from that, then we will see the early days, where I think Jibo is in the early days of that, of multimodal, multi-sensor
Right.
experiences where you're forming relationships. Think kids, think today's millennials or whatever they're called next, and then you think the elderly. So I think there will be a relationship component, and I suspect a lot of the features will be similar in the early days, but then we will see a split between those, where there will be a whole universe of an ecosystem of skills for relationship-driven, ultimately humanoid-like experiences, from shopping to companionship to advice to shrink sessions. I mean, use your imagination, to the other ones which are really utilitarian in nature.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just one comment. I see that happening a lot already. Especially with my 7-year-old daughter. We've had the Amazon Echo since it first came out, like a year and a half ago or something like that, 2 years ago, and
It's your daughter's best friend?
she does everything using the Echo. She uses that a lot. She's had a tablet as well that she got gifted from her grandmother, which we were actually gonna wait for a while, but but she hardly uses that anymore. Only if she's gonna watch a show or a movie or something. But there's the interaction with these assistants, I think, is going to develop significantly. And also, by the way, this is true also in the car, because when you think about the car, Toyota, I thought, had a very nice demonstration recently. I think it was at the CES, where they had this co-pilot UE which had personality, almost like a Siri or Alexa, with LEDs in the car, which has facial expressions, and I think there's going to be a lot of development there, along with, but it has to. I think it's going to transform, like Rudina says, from single mode of interaction, like a voice or a look, Amazon Look, or it's going to be multimodal. And
to adjust to that point, I think, imagine today when children are playing with their iPads, iPhones, and whatnot. There is interaction, and the common. I have a 3.5-year-old. The common is, "Oh my God, how did she figure that out? It took me this," because their brains are being reshaped. They don't have preconceived notions. That's why. But as you go into interacting, a different relationship with the devices. Imagine now vision. You can take the child's face, make them part of the storyline. As they motion, the story advances in real time. You use their voice. All of a sudden, unimagined experiences, to your earlier point, a whole new universe of experiences and services and products that we have yet, even how they learn is being changed and will be reshaped.
So you get computing with a much greater sense of empathy, because it can react to the human experience if designed well.
With a much bigger sense of emotion, whether it's empathy or not, it kind of depends on one's social system and perceived notions, but yes.
Well, so our social system is going to have to, we're going to have to sort of refabricate how we think about our relationship with machines going forward, and that's going to play a lot into the kinds of businesses that are going to be able to be developed coming out of this. So particularly when you see your 7-year-old and when you see your 3.5-year-old, how do you think that they're going to grow into computing? What are they going to turn to computing for, and what
Sure.
aren't they in particular?
You know, this is a good time to talk about AR. You know, I think we haven't really talked a lot about augmented reality or mixed reality. You know, in one extreme of the world, you know, will people in the future be able to differentiate from, you know, real reality versus not, you know, for example. That's a real extreme. But you know, when I think about that, I think, to me, AR as a use case is really impressive. And I don't mean AR in the sense of filters on a selfie. I mean AR really from a perspective of being able to visualize your world and then get meaningful actions or insights based on what you see. And then eventually, on mixed reality, you can project other other elements into the real world, right? So I think a lot of these experiences, be it within the home, in car, in a retail space, etc., are really going to transform into something that is could be transformed into something that is an AR-based or mixed reality-based experience. And I think that would have a profound impact way into the future.
So my view is that if you think about it, so the internet was invented, Tim Berners-Lee at CERN in 1989. So that generation, really the sort of 25, 30, 35 years old, are digital natives. I don't think they have ever known a world without the internet, and I don't think they're any more shocked or dysfunctional than the prior generations. I think you look at the 15 and whatnot year olds, they're mobile natives. I think our children will be AI natives. And the point I'm trying to convey through that is, you know, they're not going to wake up and be shocked by the environment. It's that frog where the temperature is increasing gradually. I think it's going to be very, very natural to them. As we look back at future generations, it's going to be quite transformative, and again, will yet again redefine the relationship that we have with the machines. And honestly, you know, if I want to fast forward, and VCs are terrible, terrible futurists, so take this with a grain of salt, but I think it will redefine the sense of where do I as a human end and where does it begin if we really play this forward. But I think it's going to be gradual. It's not going to be a shock to the system, but it's going to be a give and take relationship between us and machines.
So Rohit, you brought up AR and VR. And then you ended that comment by saying a very, very long time in the future. So where are the investment opportunities in 2017 in those technologies?
Well, I think you know, AR is a good one, because very, very long time in the future could be 10 years, but investments, you know, that's why we need to sort of stay ahead of the trend. And again, you know, there it goes back to, I think, opportunities with, and these are deep technical problems. You know, the user experience around AR. I mean, VR. I didn't really bring up VR too much, but the user experience around AR today is really not something that exists really. That you can actually use in the real world. For example, you know, Google Glass did tried to do that, and there are many other different quote-unquote wearables that are trying to do that, but the experience just doesn't get you there. The first experience around, I think upskills is here tomorrow. I think in the manufacturing setting, I think that's coming up, and I think that's a good place to start, because a lot of this AR applications are actually are first going to take place in enterprise, which is, you know, for small snippets of time for very focused work, one way or the other. You can even ask, you know, one day an employee might even get, you know, an AR, let's just say a machine, to be able to use that. So I think that, and then from a vehicle perspective, you know, great use cases. You have this world around you. Even today, you have all these windows around you. Could we imagine the whole the windshield being an AR projection platform? You know, and what could you do with that? So I think on the AR side of things, on the deep technology, both on the hardware and the software space, there's actually a lot of room for improvement.
I would generally concur. I think in the short term, as we think about AR and other technologies or VR, I think the short term is probably going to be an augmentation type solutions for the enterprise, so not necessarily taking over a function that's being fully performed by a human, but in enhancing and augmentation on the way to automation in the longer term.
Great. And do we have time for an audience question out there? Anyone?
We have time. Who has questions? The beautiful thing about asking a question is we don't know who you are. And if you're
Until we
smart,
ask the
as you
question.
are, unless you ask a really smart question, then we want to come find you and talk to you. If you don't ask a question, we don't
We got
find you.
one in the front here.
Great.
I'm very curious what the perception is about the evolution of hardware. That is, right now, the consensus seems to be that GPUs enabled certain stacks of deep learning, which sort of enabled the ability for theoreticians and engineers to develop these models. But now you've got organizations that are looking towards low power systems and other technologies. In fact, there's discussion of using alternative storage systems. Memristors have been discussed for something like 8 years as an alternative, for instance, to creating synapses as opposed to computing synapses via GPUs. You have places like Mobileye that have dedicated silicon, and you've had other discussions about compacting either evaluation or learning hardware, which is necessary because you can't tug around 500 watts of compute gear in the back of your Prius. What is the perception in terms of investment in markets in terms of the next, let's say, 2 to 5 years about the evolution of low power, high performance, either generalized convolution memory, as things like tensor units are, or more specialized platforms?
I can take that question first. So you're really asking about, when you say hardware, you're talking about compute platforms. Really, I think that's where the question is directed. So I think there are a few different kind of compute platforms today that are sort of in the limelight, right? There's the GPU, which is really led by NVIDIA. You saw in one of their curves where they have the exponential growth via a combination of the GPU and the CPU, and I think that is going to happen. On the other side, there's a lot of companies that prefer to actually use FPGAs, right? And the reason that is happening is because their use cases, their algorithms, machine learning algorithms, AI algorithms, they're all evolving, especially in general, as well as to their use case, right? We've had deep convoluted networks, we've had reinforcement networks, we have binary, and so on and so forth, right? So I think a lot of companies like to use FPGAs to have that flexibility to be able to evolve with the software and their use case as it evolves. Longer term, I think what's going to happen, longer term again, in the next, say, 5 years, what's going to happen is that a lot of these platforms are going to evolve to an ASIC, something that is, back to silicon, something that's very specifically designed for what you're trying to do. And you give the example of Mobileye. That's a really good example. They just got bought by Intel for $15 billion, and that's in that example, they early on in their life developed an ASIC focused on that. And I think as we find really, really hard problems to solve, what we are working on is really hard from an autonomous driving perspective. And there are many other examples, natural language, et cetera. What I think is going to happen is that you're going to start to see really specific compute platforms develop for very specific use cases. I don't know if that's the best area to invest. I think there will be good outcomes from that, but from that effort. But that's how I think about compute platforms.
If I focus beyond the ICs and sort of at the infrastructure level, I think two trends. One, hardware is popular, which is not always the case because it tends to be quite capital intensive, but there is a reason for that, a good reason for that, which is all of the innovation around AI, learning and whatnot, it's occurring largely at the software level and initially enabled by what happened with cloud computing, but now all of the infrastructure and hardware is generally legacy with pockets of opportunity. So I think getting to the intelligent cloud, we're proactively pursuing that. There are companies, startups, and more established ones that are doing it. I think, but we're still, sort of, even if you think about, irrespective of the $2 billion spent in marketing with IBM Watson, at the end of the day, they're just throwing more racks at the problem. So is there a way to completely reimagine that part of the ecosystem and the infrastructure? And what does the intelligent hardware infrastructure really mean from the ICs all the way to intelligent cloud, and how it ramps up and down? So I think it's ripe for disruption.
Thank you very much. That was a great question. And with no further ado, I will pass it to Evan. Thank you, you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.